Coordinates. Drone surveillance. No escape route. This wasn't a battle. It was an execution. Deep inside Rostov Oblast, behind what Russian planners considered an impenetrable buffer of distance and air defense coverage, a converted agricultural facility had been quietly transformed into something far more dangerous. Not a warehouse, not a grain storage site. A forward command post for one of Russia's most decorated ground formations. The 810th Separate Guards Naval Infantry Brigade, the Black Sea Fleet's primary land combat force. The men inside that building believed they were safe. The distance alone put them beyond the reach of Ukrainian rocket artillery, or so they thought. The HIMARS system couldn't touch them here. Their intelligence assessment said so. Their generals said so. Their own maps said so. They were wrong about all of it. I'm your host at Conflict East, where we analyze the battles that change wars. Today we're breaking down one of the most precisely executed HIMARS command post strikes of the entire conflict. A single salvo that decapitated the planning structure of an entire Russian Naval Infantry Brigade at the exact moment when its leadership was assembled in one room, reviewing operational orders they would never implement. This is the story of how Ukrainian military intelligence turned a Russian operational security failure into a catastrophic command collapse, how a single ISR asset, patient persistence, and a firing solution the Russians genuinely believed was mathematically impossible combined to produce one of the most consequential precision strikes of the Eastern campaign. Stay with me. What unfolds over the next 22 minutes doesn't just explain one strike. It explains why the 810th Naval Infantry Brigade, a unit that held the Zaporizhzhia axis for months and served as the Black Sea Fleet's primary ground combat arm, effectively ceased to function as a coherent command structure after a single HIMARS salvo. The 810th Separate Guards Naval Infantry Brigade traces its history back to Soviet-era amphibious warfare doctrine. Based in Sevastopol, the brigade became the Black Sea Fleet's ground combat arm almost immediately after the full-scale invasion began. Naval infantry brigades in Russian doctrine are considered elite formations. Better trained than standard motor rifle units, more reliable in defensive holding operations, more disciplined in combined arms coordination. By the time this strike occurred, the 810th had accumulated substantial combat experience across multiple frontline rotations. The brigade held positions in the southern Zaporizhzhia direction, providing the connective tissue between Russian forces pushing toward Orikhiv and the garrison structure maintaining Crimean approaches. When Russian planners needed a formation that could simultaneously hold ground, coordinate with Black Sea Fleet naval assets, and maintain operational discipline under sustained Ukrainian pressure, they reached for the 810th. Which meant its command structure was irreplaceable. And irreplaceable things, in modern warfare, become high-value targets. The forward command post in Rostov Oblast wasn't the brigade's primary headquarters. That facility remained in Crimea, under multiple layers of Russian air defense coverage. The Rostov facility served a different purpose. A forward planning node, positioned to reduce command latency between brigade leadership and frontline battalion commanders operating in the Zaporizhzhia axis. Russian generals had learned, painfully, that communicating from Crimea to eastern front lines introduced delays that cost lives and positions. Moving planning elements forward seemed like sound doctrine. It was also the decision that made them vulnerable. Which weapon system proved most decisive in this operation? A. The HIMARS M142 GMLRS rocket. B. Satellite imagery analysis. C. The ISR drone that identified the command structure schedule. Think about it. The answer comes at the end. The agricultural facility sat approximately 4 kilometers outside a small settlement in Rostov Oblast. Russian engineers had been methodical in selecting it. The main structure, a reinforced concrete building originally designed for grain processing machinery, offered substantially more protection than a typical field command post. Satellite imagery from before the conflict showed a standard agricultural installation, nothing unusual, nothing that would trigger automated pattern recognition systems scanning for military infrastructure. The Russians invested real effort in camouflage discipline. Vehicle movements occurred primarily at night. Antenna arrays were positioned to minimize electromagnetic signature during daylight hours. Local residents had been told the facility was being used for logistics coordination, a cover story unremarkable enough to avoid curiosity. Russian counterintelligence had established checkpoints discouraging civilian movement near the perimeter. From a Russian operational security perspective, the facility checked every box. Distance from the front, structural hardening, emissions control, cover story, air defense umbrella. The nearest S-400 battery was positioned to cover approaches from Ukrainian-controlled territory. What Russian planners didn't adequately account for was behavioral signature, not electromagnetic emissions, not vehicle movement, human behavior. Ukrainian military intelligence had been tracking the 810th Brigade's command rotation patterns for months, not through dramatic infiltration operations or intercepted satellite communications, through the patient accumulation of pattern data. ISR assets documented vehicle movements at the Rostov facility over an extended observation period. Analysts cataloged arrival and departure sequences, identified vehicles associated with known command personnel, and mapped the temporal rhythms of the facility's operational cycle. The discovery that changed everything wasn't a dramatic intelligence coup. It was pattern recognition. Ukrainian analysts identified that the facility hosted a full brigade staff briefing at a predictable hour on a predictable schedule. A synchronization meeting where battalion commanders, logistics officers, artillery coordinators, and the brigade operations staff assembled to review the consolidated operational picture. In a modern military context, this kind of staff synchronization is essential. You cannot coordinate a multi-battalion formation across a complex front line without periodic consolidated reviews. Russian doctrine built these synchronization cycles into brigade operations at the formation level. Sound practice. Also a catastrophic vulnerability, because when the ISR asset confirmed the pattern, the same vehicles, representing the same command elements, arriving at the same facility at the same time on the same cycle, the Ukrainian targeting cell had everything they needed except one thing: a firing solution. Stay with me. The geometry of this problem is where the story gets extraordinary. The facility's distance from the nearest confirmed Ukrainian HIMARS firing position created what Russian planners had assumed was a safe zone. The M31 GMLRS rocket carries a published maximum range of approximately 70 kilometers under standard conditions. Russian distance calculations placed the Rostov facility at a margin they considered comfortable. Not just outside HIMARS range, comfortably outside it. Subscribe to Conflict East if you want to understand how modern warfare actually works. What happened next is a masterclass in why assumptions about weapons range are tactical suicide. Ukrainian HIMARS crews had, over the course of the extended campaign, refined their understanding of GMLRS performance parameters with an engineer's precision. Published range figures represent standard engagement conditions: nominal temperature, standard atmospheric pressure, standard rocket motor performance. Real-world conditions, combined with crew expertise developed through hundreds of operational launches, meant the theoretical performance ceiling and the practical performance ceiling were not the same number. More critically, the Ukrainian targeting cell didn't need a direct solution from a static position. HIMARS launchers are mobile. The M142 platform, a 5-ton truck chassis carrying a 6-rocket pod, can reposition between firing positions in ways that static artillery cannot. Ukrainian doctrine had evolved to use this mobility tactically, moving launcher vehicles to positions that created firing solutions against targets otherwise out of reach. The targeting cell worked the geometry backward, not from where the launchers currently were, from where the launchers could be, given available terrain, route trafficability, and the air defense threat picture in different sectors. They weren't mapping the current solution space. They were mapping the possible solution space. It took time. Weeks of analysis, cross-referenced against ISR coverage, terrain data, and real-time air defense movement tracking. The Ukrainian military doesn't rush precision. Rushing precision costs lives and wastes assets. Patient analysis produces outcomes. The analysis identified a firing position, a location where a repositioned launcher, operating at the outer edge of its practical performance envelope, could generate a viable firing solution against the Rostov facility. The geometry worked. Barely. But barely is enough when the target is a brigade command staff assembled in one room. The obstacle wasn't the targeting math. The obstacle was execution timing. Moving a HIMARS launcher into the identified firing position required transiting terrain that presented its own threat. Russian reconnaissance assets monitored key road networks in the oblast, and the repositioning route passed uncomfortably close to sectors with confirmed Russian drone activity. A launcher detected in transit would compromise the entire operation. Russian forces would relocate the command post within hours of detecting Ukrainian interest in the area. The Ukrainian planning cell solved this the way good military planners solve hard problems. They didn't try to eliminate the risk. They managed it with timing. The repositioning would occur during a window when Russian drone coverage in the relevant sector was historically reduced, identified through the same patient pattern analysis that had mapped the command post's briefing schedule. Move during the gap. Reach the firing position. Execute before the gap closed. The launcher crew received their coordinates and their orders. A single M142 HIMARS vehicle, repositioned to a precisely calculated location, 6 rocket pod loaded, firing window measured in minutes. The ISR asset confirmed the target pattern holding. Vehicles representing the key command elements had arrived. The synchronized briefing was underway. The entire planning structure of the 810th Naval Infantry Brigade was in one building. The crew completed their pre-fire checks. The launch sequence requires verifying firing coordinates, confirming weapon system alignment, validating communication linkage, and obtaining final authorization. Every step represents a point where a technical failure could abort the mission. The crew ran through every check. Everything was nominal. If you believe tactics win wars, type Conflict East in the comments. The first HIMARS M31 GMLRS rocket left the pod at high velocity, the rocket motor igniting and pushing the munition onto its calculated trajectory. The GMLRS is a GPS-guided weapon with a circular error probable measured in meters. When the coordinates are correct and the guidance system is functioning, the rocket goes where it's aimed with a precision that 20th century artillery crews would have considered science fiction. The warhead carries a 90-kilogram high-explosive fragmentation payload designed to defeat hardened structures and suppress personnel in hardened positions. 5 more rockets followed in rapid sequence. 6 GPS-guided munitions, each weighing approximately 154 kilograms fully fueled, climbing through the Rostov Oblast sky on trajectories calculated to bracket the converted agricultural facility with overlapping terminal effects. The Russian air defense network did what it was designed to do. It attempted to respond. The S-400 battery covering the approach sector had to acquire the incoming tracks, classify them as threats rather than false contacts, generate intercept solutions, and launch interceptors. All of this takes time. The GMLRS travels fast. The terminal phase compresses the intercept geometry severely. 2 rockets were engaged by Russian air defense. Neither intercept was confirmed successful by subsequent battle damage assessment. 4 rockets impacted within the facility's footprint. The first struck the main building, the reinforced concrete grain processing structure that Russian planners had selected for its structural durability. A GMLRS warhead hitting reinforced concrete creates a specific damage pattern. The outer walls absorb and deflect some of the blast, but fragmentation penetrates windows and secondary openings, and the overpressure wave propagates through interior spaces with lethal effect on anyone not in hardened shelter. The 810th Brigade's planning staff was assembled for a briefing. They were not in hardened shelter. They were at a table with maps and communications equipment, doing exactly what military staff officers do during a synchronized review. Precisely the human target set that a command post strike is designed to neutralize. The second, third, and fourth impacts addressed secondary structures within the facility. The vehicle park, where command vehicles were staged, a generator facility providing power to the communications equipment, and a structure identified as housing the brigade's primary communications nodes. What would NATO have done differently in planning this kind of precision strike? The intelligence cycle, the targeting geometry, the execution timing. Drop your analysis in the comments. The strike duration from first impact to last was under 40 seconds. 4 GMLRS rockets reshaped the operational capacity of a Russian Naval Infantry Brigade in less time than it takes to read this paragraph aloud. The ISR asset maintained coverage. Drone operators watching the facility's thermal and optical signature saw the impact sequence. Rapid detonations, structural collapse of the main building's roof section, secondary fires from fuel storage at the vehicle park, a smoke column rising from what had been the brigade's forward planning node. No surviving vehicles departed the facility in the immediate aftermath. The vehicle movement pattern that Ukrainian analysts had spent weeks documenting went silent. Intercepted Russian communications in the hours following the strike revealed the operational panic that Ukrainian planners had anticipated. Unit commanders subordinate to the 810th Brigade began requesting guidance through alternative communication channels, reaching back to rear area elements for orders the forward command post could no longer provide. The communications intercept picture showed a command structure struggling to reconstitute itself while simultaneously managing the immediate aftermath. Medical evacuation, damage assessment, and the realization that their supposed safe distance had been a lethal miscalculation. Russian sources later acknowledged a strike on a logistics facility in Rostov Oblast. They did not acknowledge command post targeting, did not confirm the personnel casualties, and offered no assessment of the operational impact. Standard Russian information management. Minimize acknowledged losses, never confirm the specific damage to command and control capability. Ukrainian General Staff reporting characterized the strike as successfully targeting a forward command post of the 810th Naval Infantry Brigade, with satellite imagery analysis confirming the structural destruction of the primary facility. Combat footage verification, cross-referenced against pre-strike ISR coverage, confirmed the vehicle park destruction and the main building collapse. OSINT analysis of Russian military communications in the Zaporizhzhia axis in the period following the strike identified coordination anomalies consistent with command structure degradation. Battalion-level elements that had been operating with clear direction from brigade level showed signs of reduced command tempo, delayed responses to frontline developments, inconsistent coordination between adjacent units, and in at least 2 documented cases, tactical decisions that experienced OSINT analysts assessed as inconsistent with the deliberate planning methodology the 810th had previously demonstrated. The brigade was not destroyed. Russian formations have proven resilient to command disruption. The sheer size of Russia's military bureaucracy means replacement personnel can be identified and pushed forward. But replacement is not restoration. A brigade planning staff develops institutional knowledge over time. Understanding of the local terrain picture, established relationships with subordinate commanders, accumulated tactical context that exists in human memory rather than in documents. When that institutional knowledge is removed suddenly and violently, the replacement staff starts from zero. The operational impact on the Zaporizhzhia axis, as assessed by Ukrainian military intelligence in the period following the strike, was significant. Not decisive in the sense of permanently eliminating Russian capability in the sector. Meaningful in the specific, measurable sense that matters in attritional warfare. Degraded coordination, reduced planning quality, and a period of vulnerability during which Ukrainian forces could apply pressure with reduced risk of a coordinated Russian response. This is what precision strike is supposed to do. Not win battles alone. Create windows. Degrade the enemy's ability to respond effectively. Buy time and space for follow-on operations that exploit the disruption. The tactical lesson embedded in this strike is one that military planners have understood since the emergence of precision-guided munitions, but that remains underappreciated in public analysis of the Ukrainian conflict. Range is not a fixed number. Range is a function of platform mobility, crew expertise, and operational planning sophistication. Russian command planners who positioned the 810th Brigade's forward command post based on a static calculation of HIMARS range made the same error that military planners have been making since the introduction of long-range precision weapons. They treated a dynamic threat as a fixed one. The HIMARS is not parked at a known location firing from a fixed position. It is a mobile precision strike system operated by crews who have executed hundreds of real-world engagements and who understand their equipment's performance envelope at a level that published specifications cannot capture. When Ukrainian planners need a firing solution, they don't ask what the published range is. They ask where the launcher needs to be to generate the solution, then plan how to get it there. The 810th Naval Infantry Brigade's experience in Rostov Oblast is now a data point in that learning process for both sides. What would NATO have done differently? The targeting methodology and the solution geometry suggest that the Ukrainian targeting cell was operating at a level of analytical sophistication consistent with the best Western precision strike planning doctrine. The patience. Months of ISR coverage building a behavioral pattern reflects intelligence tradecraft that professional Western military planners would recognize. Where NATO doctrine might have diverged is in the strike package design. A NATO operation targeting a brigade-level command post would likely have allocated additional munitions to increase redundancy against air defense attrition and would have incorporated electronic warfare support to degrade the Russian air defense network's reaction capability. The Ukrainian strike, with 6 rockets and accepted attrition of 2 to Russian air defense, reflected the resource constraints of a force operating with finite precision munitions. A reality that shapes Ukrainian targeting calculus in ways that better-resourced NATO forces would not face. Was the single-launcher approach the right call? 6 rockets, 1 vehicle, maximum mobility, and minimum signature. Or would a 2-launcher salvo of 12 rockets have been worth the additional coordination complexity and the greater chance of detection during repositioning? The targeting cell made their call based on their assessment of the target value and the available assets. The outcome suggests their judgment was sound. Could the 810th Brigade have prevented this? Yes. Behavioral pattern discipline is the countermeasure to this kind of targeting methodology. Varying the timing, frequency, and location of command synchronization meetings, never establishing a predictable cycle, denies the ISR asset the pattern data that makes the targeting cell's analysis possible. The brigade's operational security failed not because they were sloppy in the conventional sense. They failed because they were predictable. In an environment with persistent ISR coverage, predictability is the deadliest vulnerability. Now the answer to the tactical question from earlier in this video. Which weapon system proved most decisive? The HIMARS rocket, the satellite imagery, or the ISR drone that identified the command structure schedule? The answer is the ISR drone and the pattern analysis it enabled. Here's why that matters. The HIMARS rocket is the kinetic instrument, the tool that converts targeting data into physical effect. The satellite imagery confirms the target's existence and physical characteristics. But without the behavioral pattern analysis that identified the briefing schedule, without the weeks of ISR coverage that mapped the command structure's predictable cycle, neither the satellite imagery nor the rocket has a target to work with. The targeting is the force multiplier. The weapon is just the last step in a process that the ISR and analysis enabled. This distinction matters for how we understand modern warfare. Precision weapons have transformed military operations, not primarily because they are more destructive than their predecessors. They are transformative because they allow military force to be applied with analytical precision, targeting not just physical locations but behavioral patterns, command vulnerabilities, and temporal windows. The 810th Brigade's command staff was in that building because a pattern analysis said they would be. The rocket went to that building because a geometry analysis said it could. The combination of those two analytical achievements produced the outcome. Are you ready to see what happens when Ukrainian forces push that same analytical methodology against an even harder target? The precision strike campaign against Russian command infrastructure in the deep rear is producing operational effects that are reshaping the conflict's tempo. Conflict East is going to break down every one of them. 3 questions to leave you with. Was concentrating the brigade planning staff in a single forward facility the decision that created this vulnerability? The right operational call? The doctrine rationale was sound: reduce command latency, improve coordination with frontline units. But the security cost was catastrophic. Was the operational benefit worth the risk? Could the Russian air defense network have prevented this? 2 rockets were engaged. 4 got through. What would a more capable or more numerous air defense deployment have required to change that ratio? And was that capability available to Russian forces in the Rostov Oblast sector? What would you have done differently? As the Ukrainian targeting cell, choosing between a 6-rocket single-launcher strike and a larger package with greater redundancy but greater detection risk? Drop your analysis in the comments. We read every one. Subscribe to Conflict East, because we break down the battles that textbooks will study for decades. Real tactics, real consequences. Conflict East. The fields outside that agricultural facility are quiet now. The structure is gone. The vehicles that arrived for a briefing and never departed are wreckage. Silent reminders that in modern warfare, distance is not sanctuary. Predictability is not security. And the forces that understand that distinction are the ones writing the history. Stay vigilant.